Greetings. So we're back with part 2 of this video series, if you will, on true Maroonage, true nationalism. So let us continue. The true Maroon recognizes the necessity of building both a national and international government that we ultimately must build in this country and nation and nations of African people the world over, called in Yoruba Itankale, the so-called diaspora. A true Maroon or nationalist is not afraid to delegate power. We have a lot of people who enter into nationalism bearing their egotistical problems with them. We have a lot of people who think that because a person spouts a nationalistic idea or ideology, they have overcome selfishness, greed, self-centeredness, pettiness, ignorance, and fear. And all you got to do is look on the internet to see that that's not true. Those things still must grow and develop. We often warn people not to fall for people merely because they project a nationalistic ideology. You got to look into their souls, look into their character and see what the character really has in it. It is that which determines your relationship with them, not just statements of ideology and all of that. Ultimately, if we are to control our destiny, we must become in some form self-governing or sovereign. A nationalism not talking about self-government or sovereignty, not talking about nation building, not constructing a national network, not constructing a national economic, social and political system, is a lacking nationalism. A true nationalist person or Maroon only motivates through language, not only motivates through language, rhetoric and oratory, but through training. You cannot train a people with a 2-hour lecture on Saturdays. You cannot train people with monthly or weekly meetings. We often get people who ask us, why do we do this? Why can't we just get it? They throw up their hands in exasperation. Why do we behave this way? Can't we see it? What must be done in order to overcome these whatever? We get this kind of stuff all the time. Often the questions are asked with the expectation that some kind of magical formula is going to be handed out, just like akoko. In Yoruba, akoko, that's like presto or abracadabra. They feel like they can say akoko and things would just change. And it's not that way. What you do is you do whatever every other people have done that are in a position of respect. What do you think these schools are out here for? Think about that. What do you think the colleges are here for in particular? What do you think the various institutes are here for? Think tanks, institutions, whatever. They are here to train people to behave the way they are expected to behave. Pay attention to that. You don't leave it to circumstances and happenstance for your people to behave the way they should behave. You train them to behave the way they should behave. That is why you build schools and institutions are, like in our case, temples that serve more than just the spiritual aspect of things. The Japanese don't ask why their children have to behave this way, like we do. They train them to behave a particular way. They inculcate them and they send them to school. Once a week, 2 hours on Saturday, a lecture here, lecture there. No, every day is what this whole re-Africanization process is supposed to be about. Throughout the summer, the evening, everything. They spend more time with their teachers and their trainers, more often sometimes with their parents. But this is for their future. And this is what you do. If you want your people to behave correctly economically, then you educate them economically. If you want them to behave in the family way, correct them in the family way. If you want them to behave correctly in terms of self-respect towards one another, train them with self-respect. This is not something that comes about by accident. Institutions have to be developed and built so that this training could take place. The greater part of their time and the time and efforts of our children should be dedicated to being trained to acquire the behavior that we need to advance our interests. We are not going to get the behavior that we desire or need or wish for if we depend upon the behavior being trained into our children by our enemies, by people who need to have ill-adjusted and maladjusted behavior to maintain their power position in life. In summary, you cannot advance the interests of your people merely by talking about our greatness for a couple of hours in the afternoon. You're going to have to teach it day in, day out. Place your students and your people in a position that they may learn how to behave and how to resolve their problems. The intelligence, though it is something that is given, has to be shaped, molded. There's a story about Obatala shaping the human head before, when the spirit rather goes to choose his destiny, right, in the Isheshe tradition. And it says Obatala then shapes the person's head. And he shapes the head based on the destiny of the person, the destiny that the person chose. So we'll let y'all chew on that one, because some of this stuff has to be figured out by you too. And we will get together on a description of this stuff. The true Maroon leader sees to the welfare of their people. We studied the history of other groups in this country. The Japanese and Chinese particularly saw to it that the welfare of their people was not in the hands of other peoples, especially their enemy. When you read in the past where the Chinese and the Japanese were suffering greatly from economic oppression, they still did not let their people go on a welfare system, general welfare system from the enemy. They built their own welfare programs and their own internal caring programs. That would be called esusu for us, or susu. So, the true Maroon, if they're in a leadership position, they are constantly trying to figure out ways to actually reward their people. If it's not monetarily, it's through something, it's spiritually or something to get them advanced. So let's move on. The true Maroon grounds their social and political philosophy and practice on a realistic analysis of their situation. We recognize our enemies. We are not a slavish reader of foreign sources of other political ideology. We do not permit the reading of these ideologies to paralyze our ability to think creatively. Having one of those days with words. Our ultimate decisions, social, political, economic, and otherwise, must be grounded on that knowledge, not upon a theoretical knowledge of people who belong to the enemy. And does that mean we shouldn't read other people's stuff? No. And we've been clear on that in the past. You study the world to become an adept of the world, an adept of your enemy, an adept of yourself. The true Maroon is not a purist to the degree that he or she is paralyzed. Some of us want to be nationalists, but also want to be so pure, we end up doing nothing. We end up paralyzed. We would go into business, but that's capitalism. Can't do that. So we don't go into that. We would do this, but that's in some way related to this ideology or that enemy ideology. So we see the individual often trying to be such a purist in their nationalism and we dare say maroon because they haven't really started using that word yet, but we just want to tell you what a true maroon and true nationalist is. So you see the individual often trying to be such a purist in their nationalism until they can't engage in real practical behavior. Like a lot of them can't even deal with their own family if their family is Christian or something. The true maroon, the true nationalist, is concerned about getting their hands dirty and doing anything that is about the functional progress of the people. We can see the nationalist who is so hung up in his traumas of nationalism and capitalism that he dares not engage in any economic development. So that's where you get the incense sellers, the people that think they're going to sell incense to fund the revolution. The revolution. He or she sees themselves as having been victimized by capitalistic greed, certainly by the European, until they become afraid of money. They see themselves so used to exploitation for economic ends until they determine that money and wealth is something evil. It's not, we shouldn't be wealthy. Consequently, we get a nationalist who is hung up with waiting for African communalism to come into being, or communism, because that's capitalism, the other stuff, and they don't want to engage in that because they can't be no real nationalists if they do that. Deductively, the true nationalist recognizes that in this world, though we may want to be as pure as possible and may strive for perfection, it means at times we have to face reality for what it is and get out of it what we can and do the best with what we've got. Not let ourselves be caught up in puritanism that does nothing but set us up for destruction. The true nationalist is not caught up in indecisiveness and in some pie-in-the-sky dream about a classless society. They get engaged in the true work of building and construction. The true nationalist, maroon nationalist, is also not afraid to overthrow tradition when tradition is unproductive. They are not one who would just give obeisance to African tradition out of some blind ignorance. They are ones who will say, even though I revere the African past and revere the African traditions, that tradition can be built upon. And that's why we say New African Vodun. I and my generation have something to add to that tradition. I have a right then to use the legacy of that tradition to confront the realities of my current times and thus modify the tradition and see to the survival of my people. Therefore, the true nationalist, the true maroon, does not just manipulate and threaten with tradition, but uses tradition creatively, knowing that as long as that tradition is used for the advancement of African people, then it is valid. The true nationalist, maroon nationalist, is thus not afraid to engage in productive behavior. Where one sees nationalism and maroonage, one sees construction, actual growth and development. Where one sees maroonage, one sees building, one sees institutional development. One sees trade, development, and commerce. One sees restructuring of values, restructuring of priorities. One sees the rebuilding of relationships, family development. One sees the reallocation of resources. This is truly at the heart, the true definition that we have broken down is at the heart of the whole concept, the whole Kilombo paradigm of re-Africanization, family development, nation building, and the reality that we are at war with our enemy, external and internal. This video has been more directed towards the internal enemy. Reassess, it's time for us to reassess ourselves in relation to what we think we are. What we done read and think we all this and all that because we done read this and that. We need to check out maroonage, check out nationalism. The step beyond nationalism is maroonage. but they're kind of simultaneous at the same time. So we hope that you've gotten some out of this video, these two videos, and we bid you a beautiful week. Many blessings with your family, love. Remember the deity Yihun, which is the deity of love in Vodun. Yes, we have that in our traditions. If you have the Fongbe primer, go to the back of the Fongbe primer and look over the terminology. It's more like a lexicon. It's about 50, 60 pages worth of very pertinent Vodun terminology that you would never have thought our traditions had. If you look at all of the rituals and the singing and dancing that they try to put themselves out for, to be known for, we have a deep philosophy. And also look at Lore of the Gods. That's another one of our books that break down stories of the deities, and the Gods of Vodun, which details about 55 of the deities and what they're for, their colors, and other little details that most people don't know about. Adupwe Odipa.